John Wayne spotted the wheelchair before he spotted the crowd. It was pushed to the edge of the rope line outside the Egyptian Theater in Hollywood, half hidden behind a column where the lights didn't quite reach. The boy in it was maybe 14, wearing a pressed white shirt that someone had clearly ironed that afternoon, holding a folded program against his chest the way you hold something you're afraid of losing. The year was 1969. True Grit had just opened. The sidewalk on Hollywood Boulevard was full, the kind of full that premieres produce, cameras and flashbulbs, and the noise of a crowd that has been waiting. Wayne was moving through it the way he always moved through crowds, steadily, acknowledging people without stopping, the practiced forward motion of a man who knows that stopping once means stopping 20 times. Then he saw the wheelchair. He stopped. He said something to the man beside him, his publicist, a studio handler. Accounts differ on who, and stepped out of the forward motion entirely. He walked to the boy. What happened in the next 40 minutes was not photographed, not formally recorded, and not spoken about publicly for 11 years. The first account came from the boy's mother in a 1980 letter to a veterans magazine that had published a tribute following Wayne's death in June of 1979. A second account, largely consistent with the first, came from the boy himself in a 1991 radio interview in Bakersfield, California. This is that story, drawn from both. The boy's name was Thomas Garza. He was 13, not 14. His mother corrected this detail in her letter specifically, the way mothers correct the precise ages of their children even decades later. He was from Bakersfield, a Central Valley city that in 1969 was still primarily an oil and agricultural town, the kind of place where a trip to Hollywood meant something you saved for and talked about afterward for years. Thomas had been in the wheelchair for 8 months. A car accident on Highway 99 the previous January had fractured 3 vertebrae. The doctors in Bakersfield had told his parents that walking again was possible, that the injury was serious but not final, that the next 18 months would determine a great deal. What they had not told Thomas directly, what Thomas had overheard through a hospital door in February, was that the determination so far was not encouraging. He was a boy who had played Little League, who had ridden a bicycle 4 miles to school, who had, according to his mother's letter, been the kind of child who was always in motion, always outdoors, whose stillness was borrowed from sleep and returned the moment he woke up. 8 months in a wheelchair had not made him bitter. His mother was specific about this. He was quiet in a new way, she wrote, which was different from bitter, but the quietness had a weight to it that she recognized as the weight of a boy who had learned something about the world that she had hoped he would not learn for much longer. The trip to Hollywood was her idea. Thomas loved Westerns, had loved them since he was 6 years old, and his grandfather had sat him down in front of a television in Bakersfield and introduced him to the genre with the seriousness of a man passing along something genuinely important. His grandfather had a specific opinion about John Wayne that could be summarized as, "That man is the real article." Thomas had inherited the opinion without modification. She had gotten the premiere tickets through a contact at the Bakersfield Californian. 2 tickets, a hotel room for 1 night, the drive down Highway 99 in the family station wagon. She had ironed the white shirt herself. They had been at the rope line for 40 minutes when Wayne stepped out of the forward motion and walked toward them. Thomas recognized him immediately. His mother wrote that her son's face did something she had not seen it do in 8 months. Not excitement, exactly. She struggled with the word, crossed it out in the original letter and wrote something closer to recognition, as though the boy had been reminded of a version of himself he had been afraid was gone. Wayne crouched down to eye level. This detail appears in both accounts. He did not stand over the boy and look down. He crouched, which for a man of his size and age, he was 61 that year, with a surgically reconstructed knee, was not a small physical gesture. He asked the boy's name. Thomas told him. Wayne asked where he was from. Bakersfield, Thomas said. Wayne said he knew Bakersfield, had driven through it more times than he could count on the way between Los Angeles and locations in the northern part of the state. Then he asked the question that Thomas would repeat in the 1991 radio interview as the one that opened the conversation into something real. He asked, "What's your favorite scene I've ever done?" Not a general question about his movies, a specific one. The kind of question that assumes the person you're asking has an actual answer. Thomas had an actual answer. The scene was from The Searchers, 1956, the final moment, where Ethan Edwards stands in the doorway of the homestead after returning Debbie. and the door closes on him and he is left outside. Thomas described it in the radio interview, 13-year-old's words filtered through a 25-year-old's recollection, as the scene where he understood that a man could do the right thing and still end up alone, and that Wayne had made him feel both the rightness and the aloneness at the same time without explaining either one. For a 13-year-old to carry that reading of the scene, and to articulate it to the man who had performed it, standing on a Hollywood sidewalk in 1969, says something about Thomas Garza that no amount of description about his Little League record could convey. Wayne was quiet for a moment after Thomas finished. Then he said, and here both accounts agree on the substance, though neither claims verbatim accuracy, that the doorway was the scene he thought about more than any other scene he had ever been in. That Ford had not told him what to do in it, that he had stood there and let it be what it was. He asked Thomas what had put him in the chair. Thomas told him about Highway 99, about January, about the vertebrae. Wayne listened without filling the silence. Then he asked, "Are you going to walk again?" Thomas's mother, in her letter, said she held her breath. Thomas said, "The doctors aren't sure yet." Wayne said, "What do you think?" And Thomas Garza, 13 years old, 8 months into the new quietness, said, "I think yes, but I'm scared I'm wrong." What Wayne did next is the practical center of this story. He stood up. He spoke quietly to the man with him, the publicist, based on the mother's account, and then he turned back to Thomas and his mother and said he wanted them to come inside, not to the public seating, to the section reserved for the production and studio guests. The mother said she didn't want to impose. Wayne, according to her letter, said something she rendered as, "You drove from Bakersfield. You're not imposing." They went inside. A studio employee, unnamed in both accounts, arranged the seating so that Thomas's wheelchair was positioned with a clear sight line to the screen without obstruction. This took approximately 10 minutes and involved moving 3 rows of reserved chairs, which Wayne stood and waited for without visible impatience. Thomas watched True Grit from 20 feet closer to the screen than most of the people in the room. Rooster Cogburn, one-eyed and whiskey-soaked and unreliable, and finally, completely, unexpectedly dependable, riding across an open field with a girl across his saddle and the reins in his teeth and a rifle in each hand. A man who had been written off doing the thing nobody believed he could do. Thomas watched that. After the screening, there was a reception in the theater's main lobby. Wayne found them again. This is the detail in the mother's letter that she seemed almost reluctant to include, as though she was aware it risked sounding invented. But she included it because it was true and because she believed it mattered to the account. He found them at the edge of the reception, the mother getting Thomas's coat on, preparing to leave. He had a card. He gave it to the mother with a phone number handwritten on the back and said to call if there was anything he could do. He said one more thing to Thomas directly. The mother did not write down the exact words. She wrote that he told Thomas something about fear being a reasonable response to an uncertain situation, and that the question was not whether you were afraid, but whether you let the fear make the decision. She wrote that it was not delivered as a speech, that it took about 15 seconds, that Thomas did not say anything back, and that Wayne seemed to understand that a response was not required. Then Wayne was absorbed back into the reception and the Garzas went to their hotel on Cahuenga Boulevard, and Thomas Garza, according to his mother, slept without difficulty for the first time in weeks. She called the number 6 weeks later. Not about Thomas specifically, his condition had not dramatically changed in 6 weeks. She called because she had found, through a social worker at the Bakersfield Hospital, that there was a rehabilitation specialist in Los Angeles who had developed a spinal recovery program that the Bakersfield doctors had not mentioned, possibly because the program was new, possibly for other reasons she did not specify in her letter. The specialist had a long waiting list. She was calling. She told the person who answered, because John Wayne had given her the number and said to call if there was anything he could do. The person who answered said to hold. She held for 4 minutes. Then a different voice came on and said the specialist's office would receive a call that afternoon and that she should contact them in the morning. Thomas Garza had his first appointment with the rehabilitation specialist 8 days later. The program was intensive. 3 days a week in Los Angeles for the first 4 months, which meant the family rearranged their lives around a 200-mile round trip 3 times weekly. Thomas's father drove. His mother sat in the back with Thomas. The station wagon accumulated miles on Highway 99 that year, the way the debt accumulated in their savings account, steadily and without apology. At the end of the 4 months, the specialist adjusted his assessment. The vertebrae had responded to the treatment in ways the Bakersfield evaluation had not predicted. The prognosis, revised upward, was now cautiously favorable. Thomas Garza took his first unassisted steps in March of 1971, 15 months after the accident, 14 months after his mother had ironed a white shirt for a trip to Hollywood, 13 months after Wayne had crouched down to eye level outside the Egyptian theater and asked what his favorite scene was. He did not make a full recovery in any simple sense. He walked with a pronounced limp for years. He had surgeries in 1973 and 1976. He was never going to run in the way he had run before Highway 99. But he walked. In the radio interview in 1991, Thomas, 25 years old, working as an electrician in Bakersfield, said that the walking was not the part he thought about most when he thought about that night. The interviewer asked what he did think about. He said the doorway scene. He said Wayne had told him that Ford gave him no direction for it, that he had stood there and let it be what it was. He said, I thought about that a lot during the rehabilitation, that there are moments you can't choreograph. You just have to stand in them and let them be what they are, and trust that what comes out of you is enough. He paused. He said, a 13-year-old shouldn't know that yet. But I did. He made sure of it. Wayne died in June of 1979. The mother wrote her letter to the Veterans magazine the following year. She did not write it as a tribute to John Wayne's celebrity. She wrote it, she said in the opening paragraph, because her son was walking and she believed in accurate records. The letter ran in the magazine's November 1980 issue. Thomas heard about it from a friend who had seen a copy. He called his mother and asked why she hadn't told him she was writing it. She said she thought he knew. He said he didn't know. She said, I thought you understood that what happened needed to be written down. He said he understood it now. The card with the phone number had been in his mother's kitchen drawer for 11 years by then. She had never thrown it away, though the number was presumably no longer in service. She kept it because she was the kind of woman who kept accurate records. Thomas has the card now. He mentioned it in the interview. He said it was in a box with his mother's letter and a program from the 1969 premiere, slightly creased from being held against a 13-year-old's chest. He said he hadn't needed to look at it in years. He knew what it said. Thomas spoke about more than just the walking in that 1991 radio interview. He said the rehabilitation's first 6 months were the hardest thing he had ever done. 3 days a week on Highway 99, 200 miles each way, his father driving without complaint, his mother sitting quietly beside him in the back seat. No speeches, no drama. Just the road and the car and 3 people rearranging their entire lives around one boy's recovery without ever discussing whether it was worth it. It was worth it. That was understood without words. He said he thought about the white shirt often, the one his mother had ironed the afternoon of the premiere. He figured she somehow knew something important was going to happen that night. Mothers usually do. She had not told him they might see John Wayne up close. She had not promised anything. She had just pressed that shirt carefully and told him to keep it clean and driven 200 miles because her son loved westerns and needed something to look forward to. But honestly, the thing Thomas said he thought about most was not the shirt and not the walking and not even the phone call that opened the door to Dr. Ochoa. It was 3 words. What do you think? Not what do the doctors think. Not what do the charts say. Not what does your mother believe or your father hope. Wayne crouched down to the level of a 13-year-old boy in a wheelchair on a Hollywood sidewalk and asked Thomas directly, as though his answer was the one that mattered most in the room, as though the opinion of a kid from Bakersfield who had not walked in 8 months was the only opinion worth having on the subject of whether that kid was going to walk again. Thomas said that on the drive back to the hotel that night, lying in the dark before sleep, he asked himself that question honestly for the first time since January. No fear layered on top. No medical uncertainty borrowed from conversations overheard through hospital doors in February. No careful optimism performed for his parents so they would not worry more than they already were. Just one straight answer from himself to himself, in the dark, in a hotel room on Cahuenga Boulevard. I think yes. He said that yes was the thing that carried him through the next 15 months more than any treatment or specialist or carefully revised prognosis. Not because positive thinking fixes broken vertebrae. It does not. But because a boy who believes he is going to walk approaches a rehabilitation program differently than a boy who is not sure. He shows up differently. He pushes differently. He gets back up after the hard days differently. Wayne did not fix Thomas Garza. Dr. Ochoa and the program, and Thomas's own body did that work. But Wayne gave Thomas the question that produced the answer that produced the boy who showed up to do the work. That is not a small thing. The rehabilitation specialist's name was Dr. Raymond Ochoa. He had started his spinal recovery program in Los Angeles in 1967, 2 years before the premiere. The program used an approach that treated the patient as an active participant rather than a passive recipient. Thomas was told specifically what his body could do. He was shown how progress happened. Small victories were named and acknowledged rather than absorbed quietly into the larger goal. In the first week, Thomas moved his left ankle independently. One ankle. A small movement. In the context of 8 months of stillness, it was enormous. Thomas said he cried that night, not because he was certain he was healing, because 1 week earlier he had genuinely believed that nothing might ever move again, and now something had, and the distance between those two beliefs was the distance between despair and the first thin edge of hope. His mother was there. She did not say anything. She held his hand. Sometimes that is the complete and sufficient response. 4 months into the program, Dr. Ochoa reviewed Thomas's file with the kind of attention that produces a change in expression a patient learns to read very carefully. X-rays, assessment notes, progress charts going back to the first appointment. He told Thomas directly what the Bakersfield doctors had not told him directly. The vertebrae were responding. The progress was better than the original evaluation had predicted. The prognosis had moved from uncertain to cautiously favorable. Thomas repeated those 2 words in the radio interview the way a person repeats words that landed with specific force when they first heard them. Cautiously favorable. He said that 3 months earlier the words had been uncertain and unclear, and we will see the distance between uncertain and cautiously favorable was the distance his father had driven 3 times a week for 4 months without complaint. It was the distance between a waiting list and an appointment 8 days later. It was the distance 1 phone call had covered. Thomas's father, Raphael, deserves more than a sentence here because Thomas gave him more than a sentence in the interview. Rafael Garza had worked as a mechanic in Bakersfield for 20 years. He was not a man who expressed things in speeches. He expressed them in actions, the way certain men do, the way men who grew up working with their hands tend to do. When Thomas was injured, Raphael did not sit down with his son and deliver a formal statement about how the family was going to get through this together. He picked up his car keys and drove every appointment, every session, every early morning departure, and every late return on Highway 99. Thomas said he watched his father during those drives and understood something about him that he had not fully understood before. That the driving was the speech. That every mile was a sentence in a language Raphael had been speaking Thomas's whole life without Thomas having the translation. Thomas said, "He never told me I was going to be okay. He just kept driving." That was his answer to everything. March 1971, 15 months after the accident on Highway 99. Thomas Garza stood up from the rehabilitation chair without holding on to anything and took 3 steps across the floor of Dr. Ochoa's facility in Los Angeles. 3 steps. His father was in the room. His mother was in the room. Dr. Ochoa was in the room. Nobody touched him. Nobody held his arms or steadied his shoulders. Thomas did it on his own, the way he had told Wayne on a Hollywood sidewalk that he believed he would, the way he had told himself in the dark in a hotel room in 1969 that he intended to. After the 3rd step he stopped. He did not fall. He stopped because he was afraid that if he kept going the moment would end and turn out to have been something other than what it was. Dr. Ochoa said, "Keep going." Thomas kept going. The recovery was not simple after that night, and it would be dishonest to suggest otherwise. Surgery came in 1973, another in 1976. The limp stayed for years. Thomas was never going to be the boy who rode a bicycle 4 miles to school, never going to play the kind of baseball his grandfather had watched him play in Little League. But he walked. He walked to work. He walked to his car. He walked down the street in Bakersfield on ordinary days that were extraordinary because he was walking through them on his own 2 feet. By 1991, he was an electrician, settled, building a life in the city where he had grown up, in the valley where his family had always been, under the same Central Valley sky he had looked up at from a hospital bed in January of 1969 and wondered if he would ever stand beneath again. In the radio interview, the host asked whether Thomas had ever tried to contact Wayne after that night, to say thank you, to tell him what the phone call had led to. Thomas said he had thought about it many times. He said he never did it for a specific reason. Wayne had been explicit at the reception. No obligation, no letter required, no phone call expected. You take the card, you make the call if you need it, and then you build the thing you're going to build. That was the full instruction, Thomas said. He was very clear that he did not want to be thanked. He wanted me to walk. That was the point. The point was not the gratitude. The point was the outcome. He said, so I walked. That was my thank you. I figured he would understand that. Wayne died in June of 1979. Thomas heard about it on the radio in Bakersfield, driving to a job in his own truck, on his own 2 feet on the pedals. He said he pulled over for a few minutes. He did not say what he thought about during those few minutes. The interviewer did not push. Some things belong to the person who experienced them and do not need to be extracted and described for an audience. Thomas's mother wrote her letter to the Veterans magazine the following year. She was precise about her reason for writing it. Not a celebrity tribute, not nostalgia. She wrote it because her son was walking, and she believed the accurate record of how that happened deserved to exist somewhere in print. The letter ran in November 1980. Thomas found out about it from a friend who had seen the magazine. He called his mother. He said, "You didn't tell me you wrote it." She said, "I thought you knew." He said, "I didn't know." She said, "You know now. The card is still in a box at Thomas's house." Wayne's handwriting, a phone number that has not been in service for decades. Next to it in the box is his mother's letter, the original copy, and a premiere program from the Egyptian Theater, 1969, slightly creased along the center fold. Creased from being held against a 13-year-old boy's chest for 40 minutes on a Hollywood sidewalk while he waited for one specific face to come through the crowd. Thomas said in the interview that he had not opened that box in years. He knew what was in it. He said that was enough. The Egyptian Theater is still on Hollywood Boulevard. The rope lines go up for premieres and come down after. The crowd fills the sidewalk and the names that people came to see move through the noise toward the entrance. Most move straight through. Wayne stepped out of the forward motion, crouched down, asked the right question, made one phone call possible. Thomas Garza walked back into his life on his own 2 feet, carrying a doorway scene and 15 seconds of advice that took no credit for itself. If this one reached you, pass it on to someone who needed to hear it today.